Why do certain patterns keep repeating in your life? Why, even when you're striving to grow, does it feel like something invisible pulls you back to the same place? Maybe the answer isn't in the light you show the world, but in the darkness you avoid facing. Yes, that side you hide, the flaws, the impulses, the unresolved pain, might actually be the biggest portal to your true purpose. It's counterintuitive, I know. But that's exactly where the key lies. Most people spend their lives trying to fit in, erase their imperfections, control their negative emotions as if they were enemies. But what if I told you that what you call a flaw could actually be a hidden talent? In this video you'll discover that the dark side of your personality isn't an obstacle, but a map. If you're tired of trying to fit in, if you feel like something deeper is calling you, then this video is for you. Stay with me until the end because today maybe you'll start to clearly see what your shadow has been trying to show you for years. There's a territory within every human being that's rarely visited with sincerity, the shadow itself. What we don't like to see in ourselves, what we deny, what we pretend not to feel, builds up there like dust under the rug. But that dust doesn't disappear, it grows, shows up in the subtext of our actions, in the choices that keep repeating, in the nameless pain. The shadow is a mirror reflecting everything we avoid, but that still insists on following us. Integrating it is like turning on the light in a forgotten room. Uncomfortable at first, liberating afterward. The path of individuation, this process of becoming who you truly are, inevitably goes through this encounter with the hidden. And it's not about eliminating the shadow as if it were a mistake, but accepting it as a legitimate part of the self. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The self expands when it stops fighting itself. Healing begins when the shadow stops being the enemy and becomes the ally. Practically speaking, recognizing the shadow means noticing repetitive patterns, overreactions, discomfort with others' behavior. That's where it screams, asking to be heard. A clear example: the person who fiercely condemns others' arrogance but doesn't notice the hidden pride in their own actions. The shadow speaks in the subtext of our language, and staying silent to hear it is a deeply courageous act. When you start integrating these shadow aspects, something magical happens. You begin to feel whole. You no longer depend on constant approval, you no longer have to mask sadness with forced smiles. You begin to live with more lightness, authenticity, and inner peace. And interestingly, this doesn't come from being better, but from being more real. The shadow, when embraced, reveals light that was once trapped under the fear of judgment. Facing your own darkness is like going down the stairs of an old house at night. Every step creaks, the air is dense, and your heart races in the face of the unknown. But it's precisely in that internal basement where answers hide that daylight doesn't reveal. That's where the rejected emotions live, the unspoken desires, the unhealed traumas. Those who don't allow themselves to descend risk living only on the surface of themselves, comfortable, yes, but incomplete. Developing self-awareness requires a delicate, almost archaeological excavation. It's not about judging yourself but observing yourself honestly. Realizing when fear masks anger, when envy dresses up as constructive criticism, when longing begs for attention but comes out as aggression. Each insight is a piece of the internal puzzle being assembled. And this process, as uncomfortable as it is liberating. Because the more you know yourself, the less you depend on external validation. Some people run from themselves their entire lives, keeping busy with everything and everyone except their own soul. But the shadow doesn't go silent, it just changes masks. Sometimes it becomes anxiety, other times chronic fatigue or relationships that repeat the same cycle of pain. Facing it head-on the other hand, breaks the cycle. A simple tip? Right. Put on paper what you've never had the courage to say out loud. Sometimes darkness dissolves in ink. It takes courage to admit, "I am more than I'd like to be," and that's wonderful. Because the moment you accept your inner mess, you begin to put everything in its place. And that doesn't mean becoming perfect, but becoming conscious. The person starts making more aligned choices, relating more truthfully and forgiving themselves more kindly. The monster in the basement, when illuminated, reveals it was just a forgotten piece of our own heart. Archetypes are like secret codes of the soul, symbolic patterns that transcend cultures, stories, and eras, but also live within each of us. They show up in myths, in dreams, in movies, and also in the personal dilemmas of everyday life. When someone feels like they're living as the victim, the hero, the saboteur, or the wounded healer, they're under the influence of an archetype. And among these symbols, the shadow holds a special place. It not only reveals what's hidden, but precisely points to what we need to integrate. The shadow, as an archetype, is the guardian of what's been excluded. It embodies the denied aspects, and precisely because of that, carries immense transformational power. When we encounter the villain in movies, for example, there's something about them that attracts and repels us at the same time. That discomfort is a signal, maybe they represent a part of us we avoid facing. By recognizing these inner images, we build bridges between the unconscious and the conscious. And that dialogue is truly revolutionary. For many, symbolic language seems like something from another world, but it's more present than you think. An example? A dream where you're being chased by a hooded figure might reflect a repressed behavior or feeling. Or that intense admiration for someone, which actually reveals a dormant potential within yourself. The key is learning to read these signs with your inner eye. Guided meditations, symbolic writing, dream analysis, and even films that stir deep emotions are great tools for that. Plato said that, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And archetypes are the maps that help us along that path. By studying their symbols and understanding how they operate in our lives, we begin to navigate the sea of the unconscious with more awareness. Understanding the role of the shadow as an archetype doesn't make us free from flaws, but it does make us conscious of our choices. And that awareness is, in itself, a form of freedom. Sometimes, what bothers us most in others is exactly what we deny in ourselves. Projection is a kind of mental trick. Instead of looking inward, we throw outward what we don't want to recognize. It's like using your eyes as reverse mirrors, reflecting our shadows on the faces of others. When someone irritates us in a disproportionate way, or when we feel an exaggerated repulsion toward a behavior, it's worth stopping and asking, what exactly is this showing me about myself? Self-knowledge begins to deepen when we understand that the other is a mirror, not an enemy. Every impulsive judgment, every harsh criticism, may hide a personal truth that hasn't yet been assimilated. For example, someone who's bothered by another person's boldness may actually be repressing their own desire to express themselves more freely. This discovery isn't easy. It challenges our pride, our certainties, and the idealized image we've built of ourselves. But that's exactly where growth lies. Instead of defending or attacking, the proposal is to investigate. Why does this affect me so much? Is a powerful, almost magical question. It transforms conflict into a portal of discovery. And this applies not only to difficult relationships, but also to excessive admiration. When we idealize someone, we might actually be projecting onto them a quality that also exists in us, but one we haven't yet had the courage to live out. Observing these dynamics is like starting to decipher the hidden manual of emotions. Over time, those who practice this self-analysis begin to get irritated less and understand more. And interestingly, they start attracting healthier relationships. That's because by reclaiming their projections, they stop blaming the world for their own discomfort. It's like swapping out a foggy lens for a clearer view. The other person remains who they are, but no longer has the power to trigger hidden emotional buttons. And that, in itself, is a huge sign of emotional maturity. For a long time, vulnerability was mistaken for weakness, as if being imperfect was a flaw. But over time, the masks begin to feel heavy, and the effort to appear invulnerable becomes exhausting. The truth is, there's immense courage in allowing yourself to be fully seen, including the stumbles, the doubts, the wounds that still bleed. Vulnerability is, at its core, being true. And that truth touches, connects, transforms. When you embrace your pain without disguise, something aligns inside. You stop fighting what you feel and begin to understand where it comes from. It's in that space of honesty that healing begins. The fear of rejection diminishes, comparison with others loses strength, and a more grounded self-esteem is born, not based on perfection but on authenticity. Like clay molded by time's hands, each crack becomes a story, not a shame. Turning insecurities into growth points doesn't require big events, but small daily acts. Like admitting you need help, saying you don't know, or simply crying when it hurts. It may seem small, but it's revolutionary in a world that idolizes emotional armor. Reading authors who explore the value of vulnerability, like Brené Brown, or writing letters that will never be sent, are practical exercises in self-discovery. There, in the sincere silence, lie answers that don't scream, they whisper. And the most beautiful part? When you're vulnerable, you allow others to be as well. You create a safe space where humanity is welcomed, not hidden. Relationships deepen, empathy blossoms, and connection becomes a bridge. Vulnerability, after all, is the link between what we feel and who we are. It's what reminds us, you're not alone. And those who understand that true strength is born exactly where you thought only weakness lived. Within each person exists a silent battlefield. That's where ideas, desires, fears, and beliefs collide in battles invisible to the outside eye. This inner conflict isn't a sign of weakness, but of life. It means there's movement, questioning, searching. And although it hurts, this friction also reveals where the soul wants to grow. After all, where there's conflict, there's energy, and energy can be directed, transformed, transmuted into conscious action. Many try to silence this conflict with distractions, overwork, or immediate pleasures. But ignoring inner chaos doesn't eliminate it, it just pushes it deeper, where it comes back even stronger. The idea isn't to suppress, but to listen. Why does this duality exist within me? What's out of alignment between who I am and what I'm living? These questions, when asked honestly, can change a life. And they usually do. By facing conflict with curiosity, not guilt, you begin to see that it's not an obstacle, but a guide. It points to what's no longer working, what needs healing, what deserves to be revisited. A classic example? That constant discomfort with your current job. Maybe the problem isn't the environment itself, but the fact that its values no longer align with your soul. And in that friction, the spark of change is born. Thus, inner conflict stops being a burden and becomes a calling. A push from the inner universe to live more authentically, more in line with what truly matters. It opens the path to purpose, not through ready-made answers, but through discomforts that ask to be heard. And those who have the courage to listen invariably find a meaning that doesn't come from outside, but from within, where truth resides. To be human is to walk between extremes, between the impulse to run and the desire to stay, between the urge to shine and the fear of being exposed, between the light that shows and the darkness that hides. This duality isn't a flaw of existence, it's its poetry. To live fully is to accept that within us live both the wise and the impulsive, the generous and the selfish, the one who wants to grow and the one who's afraid to change. It's in the balance between these opposites that authenticity is born. The tension between light and shadow doesn't have to be a battlefield, it can be a dance floor. When you recognize that both are part of the performance, something shifts. You stop fighting yourself and begin acting as your own inner mediator. This awareness helps avoid extremes. You're neither deceived by impossible perfection nor crushed by guilt for feeling what you wish you didn't. Emotional maturity lives in this compassionate acceptance of your own contrast. A great example of this lies in difficult decisions. Choosing between following a dream or maintaining stability, for instance, is a common conflict. The light of the dream inspires, but the shadow of fear protects. Both are important. The key isn't eliminating one, but listening to both. Meditating on what really matters, testing small steps before big leaps, talking to people who face similar dilemmas, all of this helps to clarify the path without denying the doubts. By embracing this duality, the self begins to bloom more fully. Light shines brighter when it knows the darkness around it. And shadow, when heard, stops screaming. The result? A more integrated, lighter, truer life. Because only those who embrace all parts of themselves can live deeply. And let's be honest, living shallow is far too little for someone born with an ocean inside. Dreams are letters sent by the soul, written in a symbolic, mysterious language, but full of hidden truths. When we sleep, the ego rests and the unconscious begins to speak. It doesn't use direct words, but images, sensations, metaphors. An encounter with a stranger, a never-ending fall, a house with secret rooms. All of it carries clues. The challenge is learning to decode. And more than that, learning to listen without judgment. Interpreting dreams isn't about seeking predictions or ready-made mysticism. It's about seeking personal meaning. Why did that situation impact me so much? What does this figure represent to me? For example, dreaming of being naked in public may reveal a fear of exposure or of not being accepted as you truly are. Running from something undefined might reflect the denial of an emotional issue. A helpful tip is to keep a dream journal and write in it as soon as you wake, before your rational mind begins to erase the traces of the unconscious. Dreams reveal parts of us that often have no space in our waking lives. Repressed desires, hidden guilt, dormant talents. Sometimes, a dream brings the solution to a dilemma you've been living for days. Other times, it simply shows that something inside you wants to be seen. To deepen this listening, practices like meditating before bed, reading about archetypal symbols, or talking with therapists who specialize in dream work can be valuable tools for self-discovery. And, like everything that comes from the unconscious, dreams demand respect. You don't have to understand everything right away, sometimes just recognizing that there's a message already creates change. Over time, you develop intimacy with this dream language like a dialogue with your own inner mystery. And in that dialogue, the true self begins to emerge, not as something to be invented, but as something that was always there, just waiting to be recognized. Individuation is a silent invitation from the soul, almost like a whisper saying, become who you are. It's not about reaching an idealized version of yourself, but about uniting what's been fragmented. The conscious, what is known, shown, controlled, must meet the unconscious, what is felt without knowing, what is hidden, what pulses deep within. The journey is long, lonely at times, but profoundly transformative. And it usually begins with a restlessness you can't quite explain. This integration requires honesty, willingness to re-examine beliefs, to drop masks, and sometimes to break down the image created to please the world. It's when someone stops living from the outside in and begins to build an identity more connected to their essence. A helpful exercise is to review the stories we tell about ourselves. Who wrote this script? What still makes sense to keep? What has become a burden? These questions open doors to a new kind of life. Lighter, more real, more original. Individuation isn't a state to be achieved, but a continuous process. There's no diploma, no finish line. What exists is a progressive refinement of your inner gaze, a growing ability to make choices more aligned with what you feel, not with what others expect. Reading books that encourage this deep dive, practicing intentional silence, seeking experiences that provoke self-awareness. All of this is part of the path. There's no magic formula, but there are many maps and each person builds their own. When the conscious and unconscious embrace, a new way of being is born. More whole, more stable, more meaningful. You no longer live on autopilot, nor react to external pressures with the old impulse to hide. You take your stand with clarity, but with humility. With firmness, but also with openness. And maybe that's the greatest reward of individuation. To live so in tune with your own center that the world around you stops being a battlefield and becomes fertile ground for the expression of your being. True freedom begins when you stop fighting yourself. As long as there's an internal war, it doesn't matter how successful you appear on the outside, inside something will remain in captivity. Acceptance in that sense is a silent revolution. It's not resignation, but understanding. Understanding that everything that makes you who you are, from your noblest virtues to your most primal impulses, has a legitimate place in your story. And in that embrace, judgment loses its power. Inner judgment is a prison disguised as high standards. It demands perfection, compares you to others, points out flaws with a sharp and constant voice. But that voice wasn't born with you, it was learned. Built from criticism, painful experiences, silent traumas. Questioning that voice is the first step to dismantling its power. A helpful practice. When you catch yourself being self-critical, ask, is this voice really mine? Often it sounds a lot like someone from the past. Self-acceptance is a political, spiritual, existential act. It's saying, I am enough even when I'm not ideal. It's allowing imperfection to exist without it being a burden. That doesn't mean stagnation, but growth with more kindness. Therapies based on self-compassion, books on emotional intelligence, and practices like mindfulness can help cultivate this gentler perspective. Because when guilt steps aside, responsibility enters, the kind that acts from love, not fear. And what do you gain from this freedom? A peace that doesn't depend on what others think, or on what's yet to be achieved. A peace that allows you to experience life without the constant need to prove your worth. Accepting all dimensions of your being is like giving yourself a full embrace. And from there, everything changes. Relationships become more honest, choices more courageous, and life, finally, more fulfilling. Because self-love doesn't come from who you want to be, but from what you have the courage to embrace. The truth is, no one finds their purpose in the light alone, it also hides in the corners, the silences, the inner conflicts we avoid facing. The shadow isn't the end, but the beginning of a more authentic path. It's by integrating it, with courage and curiosity, that we begin to live more truthfully. The process may be uncomfortable, yes, but the relief of being who you are, without masks, is worth every step on this journey. If you've made it this far, you've already taken the most important first step, the willingness to look within. Now I invite you to continue. Reflect on your triggers, write about your discomforts, pay attention to your dreams. It's in those details that the unconscious whispers, offering precious clues about who you truly are and who you can become. Remember, what you reject in yourself imprisons you, what you embrace sets you free. Your dark side isn't a mistake, it's a compass. And maybe, the moment you stop running from it, you'll realize that what you were searching for out there was always inside. If this content touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you'll keep receiving videos to support your journey of self-knowledge, purpose, and inner transformation. See you in the next chapters.